My son-in-law said my opinion didn't matter, so I took everything back without saying a word, resulting in, the soup is still hot on the stove, but no one comes to eat it. I stand in the kitchen, ladle in hand, staring at the 4 bowls I've set on the table, mine my daughter Natalie's, my grandson's, and Brad's, my son-in-law. The rosemary from my little garden lingers in the steam, a scent I've always used to calm the house. But the calm isn't working tonight. I'm Lorraine, 68, from a small town outside Savannah, Georgia. I've lived here nearly all my life, raised my daughter alone after her father passed, gave everything I had to make sure she never felt the sharp edge of struggle I lived through. So when she fell in love with Brad, I welcomed him. I trusted her choice. But lately there's a silence that sits between us at the table, one that wasn't there before he moved in. And tonight that silence got loud. I didn't mean to overhear, but I did. Brad was standing just outside on the back porch, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, casual, like he thought I'd already gone to bed. I don't know why she still acts like this is her house. Her opinion doesn't really matter anymore. His words sliced through me. Not loud, not cruel, just final. Like I was a page being turned. I froze by the hallway. My knees ached from standing, but I couldn't move. I just stood there in the dark, listening to a man dismiss my worth in my own home. A home I helped pay for. A home I practically rebuilt with my own hands when they couldn't afford the contractors. I didn't cry. Not then. Just turned around, went to the kitchen, and stirred the soup again. Habit. When I returned to the dining room, they were all there, already seated. Natalie on her phone, Brad with a beer, my grandson, watching something on his tablet. No one looked up. No one asked me to sit, so I didn't. I placed the ladle back in the pot, turned the burner off, and wiped my hands on my apron. The chair I always used had a stack of folders on it. Work stuff, I suppose. But it didn't feel like an accident. Mom, Natalie said without looking up, "Can you grab some more ice?" I walked to the freezer, nodded, brought back the tray. I think I smiled. That's what I remember, smiling quietly, like I hadn't just heard myself written out of the script. No one said thank you. I sat on the edge of the counter for a while, watching them eat, listening to the clink of silverware. My stomach twisted, but not from hunger. I couldn't tell if it was heartbreak or humiliation, maybe both. Maybe they feel the same when you're older and ignored. After dinner, Brad went back to the TV, Natalie disappeared into the bedroom, and I stayed behind to clean. Again. As I wiped the last glass dry, I looked at the calendar stuck on the fridge. A gift from my church ladies group. Little flowers circling the Sundays. I used to host Sunday dinners here back when Natalie called it Mom's Table. Now I'm lucky to even sit at it, and somewhere in the quiet, I realized something. This wasn't my home anymore. I was no longer seen, just used. And if I didn't matter in their eyes anymore, perhaps it was time I stopped giving them pieces of myself. I washed my hands, dried them carefully, turned off the kitchen light, and I began to think, not about revenge, no, that's not me, but about reclaiming what was mine, my value, my voice, my dignity, without saying a word, because sometimes silence is the loudest sound in the room. And if you were in my shoes, how would you handle that? The next morning, the sun came through the kitchen window in soft golden bands, the way it always does. It lit up the crumbs left on the counter, the mugs none of them had put in the sink, and the folded dish towel I had ironed last week, because that's what my mother taught me to do even if no one noticed. I moved through the kitchen, slowly, the same way I always had. But something had shifted inside me. It wasn't rage, It wasn't sadness either. It was a kind of stillness and understanding. The kind you only get when the hurt has settled into something colder, quieter. You don't flinch anymore. You just see things differently. Brad came into the kitchen, phone in hand, yawning like a man who thought the world owed him a gentle morning. He didn't say good morning, just tapped around on his screen. "Did you use all the eggs?" he asked without looking up. "No," I said simply. "Check the second shelf." That was the first time I didn't move for him. Not in years, not since I started doing things just to keep the peace. He didn't even seem to notice. Natalie joined a few minutes later, hair tied up, still wearing the shirt she probably slept in. She kissed his cheek, smiled, then glanced over at me. "Mom, can you pick Mason up from school? Today I've got a late meeting." I paused, drying my hands slowly. "No," I said. "I have an appointment." That turned both their heads. Natalie blinked. "Since when?" I didn't answer, just walked over to pour myself some tea. You see, they were so used to me, bending my time, my back, my voice, that the idea I might say no sounded foreign to them, even suspicious. Brad chuckled under his breath. "Guess she's got a date or something." He meant it as a joke, but it landed like a slap. And then came the words, the ones I'd heard him say the night before, only now he said them out loud in front of me. Not cruel, just careless. "You know, Lorraine, we've appreciated everything really. But Natalie and I have a system now. You don't need to stress yourself trying to stay involved. You've done enough. Time to relax, right? Enjoy your space. Give us ours." I looked at my daughter, waiting, hoping. She didn't say a word. That's when I knew. This man, this boy dressed in grown man clothes, believed he was now the voice of authority. And my daughter, who used to call me in tears, from the back of her old Honda, had handed him the steering wheel of her life and mine. But I didn't argue, didn't cry. I just nodded. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I cleaned what was mine, packed what I needed. Not everything, just enough. My quilt, the worn Bible from my nightstand, the framed photo of Natalie at 6, holding a plastic bouquet and grinning like her world had just begun. I carried my suitcase quietly out to the car and opened the trunk. No one offered to help. As I stood there zipping it shut, my grandson Mason came running out, a juice box in hand. "Grandma, where are you going?" I smiled at him, the way a mother does when she doesn't want to pass her pain down to the next generation. "Just going to see a friend, sweetheart. I'll be back soon." He looked up at me confused. "Will you be here for my soccer game?" I didn't answer, just hugged him tight. Pressed my nose to his hair like I always did when he was a baby. He pulled away too soon. Brad stepped onto the porch. "You good, Lorraine?" That tone again. The one that sounded like someone talking to a tenant, not family. I turned around and gave him a smile that wasn't really a smile. "Yes," I said, "I'm very good." And I got into the car, closed the door, and drove away without saying another word. That night, I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by quiet. I poured a glass of water, took off my shoes, looked out the window, and opened the folder I hadn't touched in years. A folder Brad didn't even know existed. If you were dismissed like I was quietly erased, politely exiled, would you fight with words, or would you take your time and let your silence carry the weight? The folder was a faded leather one with a worn gold clasp, something I'd kept since the day I signed the deed to the little cottage Natalie and Mason now lived in. Back then I called it ours. Brad called it a miracle. It was never meant to be a gift. It was a promise, a foundation, something to help my daughter plant her roots deep. I never once imagined it would turn into the rope they'd use to push me out. I spread the documents across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Mortgage statements with my name at the top, bank transfers from my account to theirs, the home's original deed still listing me as co-owner. I remembered the closing day like it was yesterday. Natalie had cried. Brad had shaken my hand. I had brought sandwiches and sweet tea to celebrate. Now the house sat quiet without me, and the documents before me were proof I wasn't just a visitor. I was a builder. The pages were heavier than they should have been. Each one reminded me just how much I had poured into their lives. When Natalie got sick in her second trimester, I paid every medical bill. When Brad lost his job for 8 months, I covered the mortgage and groceries. I stayed home with Mason from the day he was born so they could both work. It wasn't duty, it was love. But somewhere along the way, my love became expectation. My help became entitlement. And worst of all, my presence became inconvenient. I remember the early days with Natalie, just the two of us, in a tiny rental with creaky floors and a leaking ceiling. I worked double shifts at the clinic while she colored on the back of old utility bills waiting for me to come home. We didn't have much, but she always smiled when I walked through the door. I was her whole world then. Now I'm not even considered. It's a strange thing how time flips everything. I ran my fingers over the last page, a notarized form, listing me as primary holder of the trust I set up after selling my late father's land. Brad never asked where the down payment came from. Natalie knew, but she never really understood the weight of that sacrifice. I had given them so much quietly, steadily, without asking for credit, and now I was supposed to fade away quietly. No, not this time. Not for their comfort, not for their pride. I looked around my tiny apartment, neat, modest, quiet. The kind of place where the floors don't creak, because they've already given up speaking. But I hadn't. Not yet. I picked up the phone, dialed a number I hadn't used in years. A voice answered warm and familiar. "Lorraine Miller," I said. "I need to update my estate documents." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "It's been a while. What are we updating?" "Everything." The next morning, I drove into town, the documents tucked under my arm like armor. I walked into my lawyer's office, wearing the same church dress I wore to Natalie's baby shower. It still fit. We sat at the same oak table we'd once signed the trust at. He glanced through the papers, nodding slowly, eyebrows lifting more than once. "You want to change the beneficiary?" "Yes." "Take Natalie and Brad off the house deed?" "Yes." "And redirect the trust?" "Yes." He set his pen down, gently looking at me, the way one does when they're not sure whether to ask more questions or just admire the quiet storm forming in front of them. "Lorraine, do they know you're doing this?" I smiled. The same polite, practiced smile I gave when Natalie asked me to start knocking before entering the kitchen. "No," I said, "and I don't intend to tell them." He nodded. "Understood." We got to work. Signature after signature, initial after initial, I reclaimed pieces of myself I didn't even know I'd surrendered. It wasn't revenge, it was recognition. Recognition of the fact that I had built something beautiful, and I had the right to decide who respected it. I left the office with new documents, new protections, and no fanfare. No fireworks, just a sealed envelope and a steadier heart. Later that night, I stood by my window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. Somewhere across town, I imagined Natalie and Brad sitting on the couch. I helped them by scrolling through their phones, unaware that the foundation beneath them was shifting. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted to be seen. Is that too much for a mother to ask? The next week passed in the kind of quiet that makes you notice everything. I noticed how my teacup never moved unless I lifted it, how no one left damp towels on my floor, how the kitchen light didn't flick on before dawn because I wasn't waking up early to pack school lunches anymore. And yet the ache didn't go away. It wasn't just about being alone. I'd lived alone before. It was about being erased from a place I helped make whole. That house, my daughter's house, still had my fingerprints on every corner, but it had been scrubbed of me. I drove by once without planning to. Just ended up there on the way home from the pharmacy. The porch light was on. Mason's bike was tipped in the grass. I didn't stop, just slowed down enough to look. The hanging flower basket I'd planted for spring was gone. The wind chime I made with Mason from Old Spoons was missing. Even the front mat, my old Welcome Y'all rug, had been replaced by something neutral and gray. It's a strange thing seeing your love removed like clutter. But the clearest sign came when I stepped into the church hall that Sunday. My friends all asked why I wasn't sitting with Natalie anymore. I gave soft excuses. Busy week. She had things to do. You know how it is. But I knew what they were really asking. Had something changed? Yes, everything. That evening, I visited my storage unit for the first time in 2 years. I unlocked the metal door and pulled it open. The air inside was stale but familiar. There were the boxes I packed when I first moved in, with Natalie and Brad. Things I thought I wouldn't need anymore, too sentimental, too old, too me. But now I saw them differently. My old rocking chair. The one Natalie begged me to get rid of because it didn't match their decor. I ran my hand along its armrest and remembered the nights I spent rocking her to sleep. The same curve in the wood was once damp from her tears. Next to it, my recipe box still sealed, still mine. Underneath a stack of folded linens was the quilt my mother gave me when I had Natalie. I'd nearly forgotten the softness of its stitching, the small patch in the corner from where Mason had spilled grape juice and tried to hide it with a sticker. Every item was a whisper from a time when my presence was wanted, needed, valued. I sat there on a milk crate for almost an hour, just listening to the silence of my own life in boxes. And that's when I made the decision. I would not be a ghost in their house. I would not shrink to make room for people who only remembered my usefulness, not my humanity. The next day, I began making calls. Not dramatic ones, no confrontation, just the quiet work of a woman reclaiming what belonged to her. I contacted the utility companies. My name was still on most of the accounts after all I'd opened them. I had only transferred billing, never full ownership, so I reversed them. The mortgage company was next. I sent in the revised ownership documents. Since the deed was jointly titled in my name and the trusts, and I was now sole trustee, the reversion was legally sound. They wouldn't be happy, but they couldn't stop it. Then came the HOA. I emailed the board, explained my updated ownership rights, kindly requested all future notices and assessments be sent directly to me. No one questioned it, and when I finally got off the phone with the insurance agent reinstating the policy in my name, only I felt it. Not power, not revenge. Control. A piece of my identity stitched back into place. That night I cooked soup. The same rosemary-laced broth I had made the night Brad told someone I didn't matter. I ladled it into a bowl, sat at my tiny kitchen table, and ate alone. But this time the soup didn't grow cold. Because I wasn't waiting on anyone to make room for me, I had already taken it back. And if someone told you that your presence was optional, would you fade quietly? Or would you return with grace and remind them without a word that you were the foundation all along? It happened on a Thursday afternoon when the sky hung low and heavy, like it knew something I didn't. I had come over to drop off a new jacket I found for Mason on sale. Soft fleece lined his favorite blue. I rang the bell waiting with the kind of hope only mothers carry. Natalie opened the door. Her smile was polite, tight. "Hi, Mom." I held up the jacket. Thought he might need this for the game this weekend. She didn't invite me in. Instead, she stepped outside and pulled the door nearly closed behind her. That's when I felt it, the shift. A wall invisible but firm. "Brad and I have been talking," she said, her voice careful, almost rehearsed. "We think maybe it's time for you to think about settling into your own space again. You've done so much, and we're so grateful, but we also need our own rhythm now." My breath caught, but I smiled. Reflex, always the smile. "I thought I had my own space," I said quietly. "You do, of course you do," she rushed. "But I mean emotionally, like letting us handle things our way. You don't need to carry us anymore." Her words were dressed in kindness, but the message was clear. "Step back, step out, be quiet." I nodded, still holding Mason's jacket like a peace offering with no takers. "I didn't know I was still carrying you," I said softly. Natalie flinched, not visibly, but I saw it in her eyes, the way she blinked a little slower. She didn't expect me to answer that way. She expected compliance, not presence. "Brad just wants us to make more decisions as a unit," she added, as if that softened the blow. "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't want to interfere." I handed her the jacket. She took it gently like I might break. I didn't. I turned to go. "Mom," she said behind me, "you're not upset, are you?" I looked back, one hand on the railing. "I'm just surprised is all. You know, when Mason had the flu last year, and you both had deadlines, I slept on the couch for 5 nights. I made soup. I missed work. No one said I was interfering then." She looked down. "It's not like that." I smiled again, this time with just a trace of bitterness. "Of course not." I walked down the steps, slowly, my knees stiff, but not as stiff as my pride. When I got home, I stood in the hallway for a long time, before I even took my shoes off. I looked around at the place I hadn't expected to come back to. The apartment I kept just in case, though I never said why. Maybe some part of me had always known I'd need it again. I looked at the calendar on my fridge. No circled Sundays, no reminders to pick up Mason, just blank squares. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the storage trunk at the foot of my bed and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a gold pendant with Natalie's birthstone. I had planned to give it to her when she turned 40, still 2 years away. A quiet gift from a mother to her grown child. A reminder of where she came from. I closed the box, slid it back into the trunk, and locked it. I would not give more to someone who believed I had given too much already. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down, like the sky was washing something away. The quiet wasn't peaceful, not yet, but it was honest. And honesty is a hard thing to sit with when you've spent years shrinking yourself into gratitude just to be tolerated. So I sat in it, and I wondered, how do you explain to your own child that giving someone everything doesn't mean they'll remember you when they feel full? It was subtle the way I disappeared. I didn't announce it, didn't make a scene. No family meeting, no final words etched in drama. I just stopped filling the spaces they had once left to me. No more Thursday casseroles. No more weekend pickups from soccer. No more folding laundry in the guest room that quietly became a storage closet when I moved in. I wasn't angry. I was empty. And emptiness can feel like peace when you've been carrying too much for too long. The last time I went to their house, it was to retrieve my baking pans. I had left them there the week before, after making peach cobbler Mason's favorite. The door was unlocked when I arrived. I heard the TV in the background and their voices overlapping in some discussion about weekend plans. No one came to greet me. I walked through the living room like a guest in someone else's home. The framed photos had changed newer ones with polished smiles, none of them including me. There was one on the mantel of Brad, Natalie, and Mason at the beach last summer. I remembered that trip. I paid for it. I picked up the pans quietly from the kitchen cabinet, washed and dried them myself at the sink, then placed them gently into a canvas bag I brought just for this. On my way out, Mason saw me from the stairs. "Grandma," he asked, rubbing his eyes, "you here for dinner?" I paused, smiled softly. "Not tonight, love. Tomorrow." "Not tomorrow either." He frowned. "But why?" I didn't know how to explain to a child that sometimes grown-ups can choose to make you feel small. Not because they're bad people, but because they've forgotten who helped them stand tall. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You know I love you, right?" He nodded, "Yeah," and I left. Brad didn't come out of his office. Natalie called later that night, but I let it ring. No message. In the days that followed, I thought maybe they'd reach out. Maybe they'd feel the absence. But silence filled the space I left, and no one rushed to close it. I walked every morning now. Same route through the park past the bakery I used to bring treats home from. I stopped by the florist once and bought myself a bouquet pink tulips and baby's breath. The woman behind the counter asked if they were a gift. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "for someone who's learning to remember her own worth." Back home, I placed them in a vase on my small kitchen table. The same table where I now drank my coffee alone, not because I had no one, but because I chose quiet over being tolerated. I pulled out a notebook later that evening, not the kind I used for grocery lists or budgeting. A real one. Linen-bound, heavy with blank pages. I wrote a single sentence at the top of the first page. The moment they stopped seeing me was the moment I started seeing myself. It wasn't meant to be poetic. It was just true. I flipped the page and kept writing stories from when Natalie was little. Things she'd forgotten. Things I needed to remember for both of us. The time she broke her wrist falling from the swing and wouldn't stop crying until I sang, "You Are My Sunshine." The night she got her college acceptance and we danced barefoot in the kitchen. Her first job, her first heartbreak. I wrote them all down, not out of spite, but because no one else seemed to carry those memories now, and I couldn't bear for them to disappear. I ended that night by lighting the lavender candle Mason gave me 2 Christmases ago, back when he still thought I was magic. The flame flickered steady, and I watched it dance until the tears came, not sobs, not loud, but soft like someone saying goodbye without ever opening their mouth. I didn't need them to say they missed me. I needed to know that if they didn't, I would still be okay. Would you wait for an apology that might never come, or would you begin writing your own closure? The manila folder had been resting in my file cabinet for years untouched quietly, aging beside old tax returns and birth certificates. It wasn't the folder itself that mattered, it was what it represented. Control, protection, proof. I laid it out on the table again, just like I had weeks before, but this time with intent, sharper than ever. I wasn't just reviewing, I was preparing. My lawyer, Mr. Halbridge, had retired, but his daughter Rebecca now ran the firm. She greeted me with the kind of warmth reserved for family or longtime clients. I suppose I was both. "You look well, Ms. Miller," she said, guiding me into the conference room. "I feel like myself again," I replied, and for once I meant it. We reviewed everything line by line. The house still technically under the family trust, of which I was the founding and controlling trustee. The utility accounts opened in my name never legally transferred. Even the insurance renewed last year and again under my authority. "Would you like to initiate the transfer today?" Rebecca asked gently. "Yes," I said. "Let's begin." We filled out form after form, notarized signature after signature. No drama. Just ink on paper, steady and calm. The kind of quiet work that gets things done without raising voices or eyebrows. And it wasn't just about the house. I added a clause to the trust. In the event of my death, Mason would inherit the property, not Natalie, not Brad. My grandson would be the one to decide what kind of home it became. Rebecca looked up at me when I signed the clause. "You sure about this?" "Yes," I said. "I raised a daughter, but I helped shape a future through my grandson. I trust he'll remember." When we were done, she leaned back in her chair and gave me a look I hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Not just because I had money or property, but because I had boundaries now. And boundaries, once you finally claim them, change everything. She handed me a copy of the documents in a fresh envelope. "If they contest this," "They won't," I said. "They won't even realize until the ground shifts." And that was the point. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want them on their knees. I wanted them to notice the silence, to feel the absence of the woman who had done everything, and who had quietly taken it all back. That night I made tea in the mug my sister gave me years ago, the one that read, "Ask me about my boundaries." It had always been a joke between us, but tonight it felt like a badge of honor. I sat on my little couch, feet tucked under me, and opened the folder again. Each document had my name in bold letters, Lorraine Miller. Not Mom, not Grandma, just me. That mattered more than I can explain. Because for so many years, I'd been an extension of other people's needs. Their helper, their emotional sponge, their free childcare, their stand-in housekeeper, their therapist, their financial backup plan. But now I was the author. I was the one with the pen. And I wasn't crossing anyone out. I was simply drawing a line. A quiet one, but a line all the same. I glanced out the window toward the night, toward the town where somewhere Brad and Natalie were sitting on a couch I helped them afford in a house I had just reclaimed, without lifting my voice. Would they understand? Would they even notice? I didn't know. But I did know this. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had found a way to see myself, and that after all this time was more powerful than any apology they might one day offer. There's a kind of calm that settles over you when you've made a decision, especially one that took you years to reach. It's not fire, it's not rage, it's a quiet hum beneath your skin, steady and unshakable. I woke up the next morning to birdsong outside my window and a letter in my email inbox confirmation that the transfer of authority had gone through. I was now the sole controlling owner of the house Brad and Natalie called theirs. And still I said nothing. They wouldn't know, not yet. Because when you've been made to feel small for long enough, there's power in doing things they'll only understand once it's too late. The next few days I kept to my routines. Morning walks, tea with a neighbor, quiet time in the afternoon, folding my own laundry, not anyone else's. For the first time in years, my days belonged to me. But as if on cue, small cracks began to form in the comfort they had grown used to. Natalie texted, "Hey Mom," the water bill bounced. "Do you have the login? Brad can't find it." I didn't reply. The next day, Mom, the HOA sent something weird. Said there's a balance due and they can't reach the listed owner. Still I stayed silent. Brad called 3 times in one evening. I watched the phone light up each time, then go dark. Each ring was a signal, not of worry for me, but of inconvenience for them. They weren't used to being ignored, but I had been for years. And that's the thing about silence. Once you learn to live in it, you stop fearing it. It becomes armor. It becomes yours. By the end of the week, I received a formal request, emailed as if I were some distant stranger. It was from Brad, but written like it came from a lawyer. To whom it may concern, it has come to our attention that recent administrative changes have been made regarding property ownership and financial responsibilities. Please clarify at your earliest convenience. No greeting, no Lorraine, no mom, no human warmth. Just bureaucracy dressed as panic. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer without comment. She responded within the hour. Handled. No reply needed. All rights remain with you. That was the moment I realized I wasn't powerless. I never had been. I had just let their comfort blind me to my own authority. I had given so much under the banner of love that I forgot love should never require erasure. A few days later, I received a knock at my apartment door. Natalie. She looked tired. Her makeup was soft, like she hadn't worn it in days. Her mouth opened, then closed again, unsure of what to lead with. I stepped aside, let her in. She didn't sit. She just stood in the center of my living room, staring at the modest furniture, the photos on the wall ones she hadn't seen in years. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked finally. Her voice cracked. I met her eyes steady. "Tell you what, that you were changing everything, the house, the accounts, the trust." I raised my chin, not defiantly, but firmly. I didn't think my opinion mattered. She winced. "Brad didn't mean it that way," she whispered, as if saying it too loudly would make it more real. "But he said it," I replied. "And you didn't stop him." Tears welled in her eyes. I thought you were okay with things." "That's the problem, Natalie. You stopped asking." She sat down then on the edge of my couch, like she wasn't sure if she belonged there anymore. "I didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome, but you did." Silence, heavy, honest. She looked at her hands. "Are you going to take the house away?" I sighed and sat beside her. "I'm not taking anything away. I'm just taking back what's mine." I never stopped giving, and no one noticed when I started to disappear. I needed to matter again, not as a babysitter, not as a backup, but as your mother. She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I miss you." "I miss being missed," I said. "That's different." We sat there for a long while, neither sure where to go next. But one thing was certain. The silence had been broken. Not with a scream, not with a fight, but with truth. If your voice had been ignored for years, would you raise it in anger, or would you reclaim everything in quiet dignity and let them come to you? If someone forgot what you gave them, would you keep giving, or would you take it back piece by piece until all you had left was your name and your peace? They didn't believe it, not at first. Brad called the mortgage company and insisted there must be a mistake. He used the tone I'd heard him use on customer service calls, cool, performative, agitated, but polite enough to avoid being hung up on. But the voice on the other end told him what I already knew. "Sir, you are not the legal owner of the property. The primary account holder is Lorraine Miller." Natalie called next. Not me, her bank. Then the insurance, then the HOA, and each time she got the same answer. "Ms. Miller is the sole account holder on file." They didn't see it coming, because I didn't warn them. And that was the point. A flicker. That's how it started. The electricity blinked off one evening while Mason was doing homework. Natalie blamed the storm, but when she opened the envelope from the electric company the next day, she saw the disconnection notice addressed to me, mailed to me. Brad paced the kitchen, Natalie cried in the bedroom, and Mason just sat on the couch with his backpack still on. He asked if they were moving. No one answered him. The locks hadn't changed. The furniture still stood where it always did. The porch light still came on at night. But underneath all of it, the soul of the home was no longer theirs, because it had never truly been theirs. They had built their comfort on borrowed generosity, and I had quietly rescinded my consent. I received a short message from Brad 2 days later. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. Another came later that evening. "We can fix this. Just tell us what you want." Bunny, after years of assumptions, silence, and decision-making behind my back, he was finally asking what I wanted. I sat with that question for a long time. What did I want? Not revenge, not humiliation, not to watch them flounder. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, unseen, unheard, disregarded, not out of malice, but so they could understand that love and presence are not rights but privileges, ones that must be cherished, not used. The next day, a notice went up on the front door of their house, a legal document, neutral language, but the words cut sharp. Ownership transfer complete. Property holder reserves full right to occupancy decisions. Please direct all future correspondence to Ms. Lorraine Miller, trustee. Natalie called. I let it ring. Then Mason called from her phone, and I picked up. "Grandma," he said, confused, scared. "Hi, sweetheart. Mom and Dad are packing boxes. Are we moving?" "No, baby," I said softly. "You're not." "Then why are they crying?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. Sometimes grown-ups have to learn hard lessons, even when they love you. He was quiet, then asked, "Will I still see you?" "I hope so," I said. "Always." That night, I stood in front of my mirror and brushed my hair like I used to when I was younger. Slow, thoughtful strokes. The woman who looked back at me was older, yes, but her eyes had cleared. Her shoulders no longer slumped. Because this woman had done something people rarely recognize as brave. She had taken back herself. The woman who once gave until she disappeared had quietly flicked the lights off on the world that refused to see her. Not to punish them, but to remind them. This house didn't run on gratitude. It ran on me. And now they would have to decide if they wanted to remember that or keep trying to rewrite history. If you were told your presence was a burden, would you plead for acknowledgement? Or would you disappear long enough for them to understand what your absence cost? It came in a brown envelope with bold print and a single line that made Natalie's knees go weak when she read it. Notice to vacate property rights have been transferred. Occupancy is no longer permitted without consent of the primary owner. The words weren't angry. They didn't shout. They simply were. That's the thing about the truth. It doesn't need to scream to rearrange your entire world. Natalie called me 4 times that day. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed her to sit with what she'd done. Not just to me, but to herself. I had spent years making sure that house stood quietly, patching roof leaks, paying the gardener, when Brad forgot stocking the pantry, when Natalie's paycheck didn't stretch. I had done it all without asking for thanks. And now I had asked for nothing. I had simply taken back what was already mine. Brad came to my apartment the next afternoon. I heard the knock slow and firm, and through the peephole I saw his face, tight-lipped, slightly flushed. He hadn't come to apologize. I could tell. He had come to fix it. The way men like him always do when control slips through their fingers. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Lorraine," he said, forcing a smile. "Can we talk?" "You're talking," I replied calmly. He cleared his throat. "This doesn't have to be messy." I tilted my head. "Messy?" He nodded. "We can work something out. Natalie and I are happy too." "Happy," I interrupted, voice low but firm. "You said my opinion didn't matter. Remember that." His face shifted, but only for a second. "I didn't mean it like that." "You never do," I said. People like you never mean it. Until the lights go out. Until the bills arrive in someone else's name. Until the ground you were standing on disappears. He looked past me into my small, clean apartment. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that this woman he'd dismissed as harmless was the very spine of the life he had taken for granted. "You're seriously going to kick us out?" he asked, his voice hardening. "No," I said. "I already did." Silence stretched between us. Then I added, "You had a home because I gave it. You kept it because I maintained it. You lost it because you forgot I was never obligated to." He swallowed hard. "Natalie's upset." "She should be," I replied. "So am I." He blinked, unsure of what to say. "I suggest you find somewhere else to stay until you can find your own footing," I continued. "The lease for that property is no longer yours to claim." "This isn't fair," he muttered. I met his eyes. "Neither is erasing the woman who helped raise your son." He stood there for a moment longer, jaw clenched, then turned and walked down the hall. I closed the door gently behind him and locked it, not out of spite, but out of relief. That night I drove by the house again, not to gloat, not to watch the fallout. I just needed to see it. The porch light was off, the curtains were drawn. The swing set in the yard stood still under the moonlight. I sat in my car and whispered, "It was never about the walls. It was about respect, about dignity, about love that gives without being asked, but breaks when it's taken for granted." I hadn't burned their world down. I had simply turned off the power and walked away. If someone took your kindness as weakness, would you let them keep building on your back? Or would you finally stand tall and let the house fall Natalie showed up the next day? No text, no call, just a knock at the door, 3 soft taps, the kind I used to use when entering her room while she was sleeping. I opened the door slowly. Her eyes were swollen lips, chapped arms folded across her chest, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be there. "Hi," she said. I nodded once, stepping aside. She walked in like a stranger, quiet, deliberate steps. Her gaze drifting from the framed photos of our family to the quilt I'd laid over the couch. She looked small, like the daughter I hadn't seen in years. Not the woman who told me I needed to find my own space. She stood in the middle of my living room and didn't speak. Just stood there taking in the shape of my new silence. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't think it would go this far." I sat down, motioned for her to do the same. "It didn't go anywhere, Natalie. You walked it here." Her eyes filled, but she didn't wipe the tears. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. "We just needed space." I looked at her calmly. "I gave you space. I gave you years of space." I stepped aside. I made myself small. And when you saw I wasn't needed, you turned my silence into absence and my giving into obligation. She covered her mouth with her hand. Her shoulders shook. "You could have said something," she cried. I leaned forward. "I did. You just didn't hear it. It was in the meals I cooked, the bills I paid, the child I rocked to sleep while you chased your career. I spoke through every sacrifice, and you listened until it no longer served you." She reached across the coffee table toward me, but I didn't move. I wasn't angry. I was done. "Mom, Brad's angry. But Mason, he keeps asking about you. He cried last night. He said he had a dream you disappeared." That broke something soft in me. I closed my eyes. Mason's laugh, his tiny hands, the way he used to run into my arms like I was the safest place on earth. But safety isn't about proximity, it's about presence. And mine had been treated like a piece of old furniture, comfortable until it got in the way of their new design. "I miss you," she said through tears. "And I don't know how to fix this." I looked at my daughter, my only child, and asked the question I had been holding on to for too long. When did I stop being a person to you? She sobbed now, truly sobbed. I didn't mean to. I got used to you always being there. I thought you wanted to help. I thought, you stopped asking what I wanted, I said gently. That's when it began. She nodded, wiping her face, then reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled letter. I wrote this last night. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you, but Mason said if you hurt someone, you have to say sorry, even if you're scared. I took the letter, didn't open it, just held it in my lap. She looked down at her hands. Are you going to evict us? She asked quietly. I sighed. I don't know. Her head snapped up, panicked. I'm not saying that to be cruel, I clarified. I'm saying that because I'm still deciding whether I believe your apology comes from love or from fear of losing comfort. She nodded slowly, like a woman accepting a verdict that hadn't yet been read. I just wanted you to know, she whispered. I see it now. I see what you did. I see how we let you disappear. I stood, walked to the window. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a gentle light across the table. A quiet moment. I never needed to be thanked, I said. I just needed not to be forgotten. Behind me, she whispered, I won't forget again. But memory alone isn't restoration, and forgiveness isn't free. If the people you raised forgot who you were the moment they found their footing, would you let them back in, or would you wait until they truly saw you again? A week passed before I heard from them again. No knocks, no calls, just stillness. I imagined their house in that quiet. I imagined Natalie pacing the living room, Mason whispering questions she couldn't answer, and Brad fuming in silence, unsure how to fix something he never thought could break. Then a letter arrived, delivered by hand, but not by them. A courier, plain envelope. Inside a note written on fine paper that reeked of Brad's tone more than Natalie's heart. We'd like to invite you to a conversation, a calm one, to work things out together. Saturday, 3 p.m. at the house. We'll be waiting. It didn't say please. It didn't say sorry. Just we'll be waiting. I stared at it for a long time before placing it on the counter. Saturday came warm and bright. I took my time getting ready, not because I wanted to impress, but because I wanted to arrive in full dignity. Clean slacks, soft pink blouse, a brooch my sister once gave me, shaped like a sunflower, strength wrapped in grace. I arrived at 2:55 p.m. Brad opened the door. Natalie sat on the couch, her hands folded, a mug of tea on the coffee table, my old floral set, the one she once called two, dated and boxed up when they remodeled. I smiled when I saw it. They had set the chairs like it was a meeting, 3 in a semicircle, a performance of equality. Please, Brad gestured. Sit. No, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'll stand. Natalie blinked, caught off guard. Mom, I've been sitting quietly for years, I said. You'll listen better this way. I looked at Brad. Go ahead. He cleared his throat. We want to undo this, not just legally, but emotionally. We don't want to lose you. I nodded. You lost me a long time ago. You just didn't notice until the lights went off. Natalie flinched. He continued. We understand things were taken for granted. It wasn't intentional. Of course it wasn't, I said. Disrespect rarely is. That's what makes it so easy to excuse. Natalie's eyes welled again. What do we do now? I paused, looked around the room I had once treated like my sanctuary, the walls I helped paint, the couch I chose when their old one broke, even the curtains they were sewn by hand by me. I don't want the house, I said softly. I don't want your apologies either. They looked confused. What I want, I said, is peace. Mine, not yours. You don't want to come back, Natalie whispered. I shook my head. I won't come back to a place that made me feel like an inconvenience. Brad looked away. Natalie let out a small broken breath. I didn't come here to bargain, I continued. I came here to make something clear. I took a single sheet of paper from my purse and placed it on the table. A document, neatly typed, no drama. It stated that they could remain in the house for now, rent-free for 3 months. After that, they would need to buy out the remainder of the trust or move. I'm not evicting you, but I'm not carrying you anymore either. Brad opened his mouth, but I cut him off. I built this family. I kept it fed. I kept it warm. I kept it moving forward when no one else would. And when I got tired, when I finally asked for space, respect, and a voice, you made it clear I was just an old woman taking up room in a house I had paid for. Natalie stood, tears streaking her cheeks. Mom, please. I held up a hand. No, I won't sit down, not anymore. And if you want me in your lives, it won't be on furniture I built waiting to be noticed. The room was still, heavy, real. I love you both, I added gently. But love has boundaries, and mine begin here. I turned to the door, reached for the knob, and then I heard a soft voice from the stairs. Grandma, Mason. His eyes were wide, his voice careful. I knelt. Hi, baby, are you leaving again? I kissed his hand. No, sweet boy, I'm just going home. He nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but sensing something different in my tone. When can I see you? Whenever you want, I said, as long as you come to me. I left after that, not triumphant, just full of the truth I had waited years to speak. If the people who loved you only heard your silence when it hurt them, would you forgive them right away? Or would you stand tall and let them sit with the echo a little longer? I moved back into the house a month later, not because I missed it, but because it was mine. And I wanted to feel what it was like to live in a space I had built without apology, without shrinking myself to make others feel comfortable. Natalie and Brad left quietly. No more letters, no fights. They signed the agreement, took what they could carry, and slipped into a rented condo on the other side of town. Mason came by the first weekend. He brought a drawing, a house with a tree, and a stick figure labeled Grandma. I hung it on the fridge and made him grilled cheese, just the way he liked it with the crusts cut off. We didn't talk about the move. He didn't ask. I didn't explain. Children understand more through tone than words. That Saturday, I sat on the porch for the first time in years. I listened to the creak of the swing Brad once promised to fix, but never did. I ran my fingers along the railing. I painted the summer Mason was born. I let the quiet settle around me, not loneliness, just calm. The yard was a mess, overgrown grass, wilted flower beds. The rosemary bush I once trimmed with such care had choked itself in vines. I didn't cry. I rolled up my sleeves and started pulling weeds. That week I hired a gardener, one who listened. A kind young woman named Camilla who smiled with her eyes and brought me hydrangeas on her second visit. We planted a new garden, roses, lavender, a fresh rosemary bush, a patch of mint by the window for Mason to pick when he visited. Each root I pressed into the earth felt like a promise to myself. You are allowed to take up space. Inside, I replaced the curtains. My curtains. I pulled out the quilt I had folded away for years and draped it over the couch. I brought my mother's photo back from the box and set it on the mantel beside a fresh candle. The house was different now, not because the walls had changed, but because I had. For too long, I believed that being a good mother meant giving until you had nothing left. That love was sacrifice and silence was strength. But love has a voice, and so does grief, and I had lived with both in my throat for far too long. Camilla once asked me while planting the marigolds near the porch steps, "Is this the first time you've had your own garden?" I paused, then smiled. No, I said, but it's the first one I planted for me. In the evenings, I sit by the window and sip my tea from the old mug they once called outdated. It fits my hand just right. Some nights Mason reads to me from his school books. Other nights I read to myself. Poems, prayers, the kinds of words that remind me I still matter. Natalie texted me once last week. Hope the garden's blooming. I think of you every time I smell rosemary. I stared at the message for a long time. No anger, just ache. I didn't reply. Not because I'm bitter, but because sometimes love doesn't look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like boundaries kept. Sometimes it looks like a sunflower blooming in a bed you dug with your own tired hands. Sometimes it looks like quiet peace after decades of invisible labor. And sometimes it looks like coming home, not to a house, but to yourself. If you could finally reclaim your life after years of giving it away, would you, even if it meant planting new roots? Alone. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I heard the knock. Not hurried, not hesitant, just soft. 3 taps just like Natalie used to do when she was little and wanted to come into my room without waking me too roughly. I opened the door to find Mason standing there, a backpack slung over one shoulder. His favorite green hoodie zipped all the way up despite the warmth in the air. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I just hadn't looked closely in a while. "Hi, Grandma," he said, eyes steady. I stepped aside without a word. He walked in like he belonged because he did. His shoes landed where they always had, just beside the door. His backpack thunked against the leg of the couch. He pulled off the hoodie and tossed it to the armrest, like kids always do when they feel safe. I didn't ask why he was here. He didn't offer. Instead, he wandered into the kitchen and opened the fridge grinning. When he saw the strawberry yogurt I always kept for him, I'd bought it out of habit. I didn't think he'd come. But here he was. He sat at the table, swinging his legs like he used to when they didn't quite reach the floor. "I told Mom I wanted to see you," he said, peeling back the foil lid. I poured myself tea and sat down across from him. "Did she say okay?" He nodded. "She said, she's still your grandma." I smiled at that. She's right. He scooped yogurt in silence, then asked the question no adult had dared to. "Why don't you live with us anymore?" I sipped my tea slowly, choosing my words like pebbles across a riverbed. Because sometimes, even when you love people, you have to give them space to realize what you mean to them. "Did they forget?" he asked wide-eyed. I looked at him. "Yes, baby, they did." He blinked, digesting that with more grace than most grown-ups could manage. "Are you mad at them?" "No," I said truthfully. "But I'm not going to live in a place where I'm only noticed when something breaks." He nodded like he understood, like children do when their hearts hear something deeper than their minds can explain. He stayed the whole day. We baked cookies, played cards, pulled weeds from the flower bed, and replanted a few marigolds that had wilted in the heat. At one point, he stood in the yard and said, "It feels like when I was little." "You are still little," I said, chuckling. "But I mean, it feels safe again." That night, when Natalie came to pick him up, she didn't step inside. She stood on the porch, eyes lowered, as Mason ran to hug me goodbye. "Can I come next weekend too?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Of course. He ran to the car and she lingered. "I didn't put him up to it," she said. "He really wanted to come." I nodded. "I know." She hesitated. "Thank you for letting him in." I looked her in the eyes for the first time in weeks. "He's always welcome, but you'll have to knock harder." She flinched at that, a soft breath escaping. "I'm trying, Mom." "I know," I said, and I meant it. She turned to go, then paused. "Your garden looks beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "I planted it with new roots." She nodded, and for the first time, I saw not the daughter who forgot, but the woman learning how to remember. After they left, I stood in the doorway, the night air warm and still. The wind chimes I had rehung tinkled softly. The rosemary bush brushed against the porch rail in the breeze. And for a moment, I didn't feel victorious or sad or strong. I just felt present, and maybe that was the truest form of healing, choosing peace, not power. Choosing presence, not punishment. Mason would come back. I knew that now, and maybe in time so would she. But even if she didn't, I'd be okay, because I had finally come back to myself. If the only way to be remembered is to disappear first, would you still open the door when they return? The house is quieter now, but it no longer feels empty. There's a difference between being alone and being abandoned. One hurts, the other heals. I had lived with both. Now I had chosen the one that gave me peace. Each morning I open the curtains and let the light in. I water the garden. I hum as I move through the house that once echoed with voices that didn't know how to say thank you. And somehow that silence doesn't sting anymore. I found a rhythm in my solitude. Mason comes by every Saturday, sometimes for the afternoon, sometimes for the weekend. He brings books, soccer balls, and questions, so many questions. About when his mom was little, about the photos on the walls, about why I don't live with them anymore. I answer only what I need to. The rest I let him feel. Natalie still texts, and once or twice, she's come with Mason, never alone. Her words are softer now, her eyes more tired. She's no longer the woman who told me gently to let go. She's the daughter who sees the consequence of forgetting who held her. And Brad hasn't come. That's fine. This part of the story was never about him anyway. I sit on the porch most evenings, wrapped in my quilt, sipping tea from the chipped mug I once packed away. When they said it didn't match their kitchen, it fits my hands perfectly now, has always. Across the yard the sunflowers sway in the breeze, strong, tall, unapologetically bright, just like I've become. I think about everything I've lost and everything I've reclaimed. Not in one dramatic moment, but piece by piece, quietly, steadily, with grace sharpened by pain. I used to think being a good mother meant giving until I had nothing left. Now I know better. It means giving without disappearing. It means loving with boundaries. It means choosing to stay whole, even if that means stepping away. People always ask me, do you regret it? No, not the silence, not the documents, not the eviction, not even the heartbreak. Because sometimes the only way to be heard is to say nothing. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is take back what was always yours without raising your voice, without slamming the door, just by standing still while the world finally remembers who held it up. And when they remember, you don't need an apology. You just need to know they noticed. If someone told you your opinion didn't matter, would you prove them wrong with words? Or would you let your absence do the talking? Now the days unfold slowly. Soft light filters through the kitchen window in the mornings. The scent of rosemary drifts in through the open screen. My garden hums quietly with bees, and the chair by the porch creaks just enough to remind me I'm still here, still living, still rooted. There's a comfort in repetition, making the tea just the way I like it. Folding laundry on my time, not someone else's. No more rushing, no more adjusting myself to make others feel comfortable. Just steady breaths, quiet mornings, and moments of stillness I once believed I had to earn. Sometimes I write letters I don't send. To Natalie, to Mason, to myself. I tuck them in a drawer, not out of secrecy, but as a promise that the words matter even if they're never read. There are no more loud conversations, no more explanations. I've said all I needed to in action, in silence, in grace. What remains now is peace, not the kind others grant you, the kind you grant yourself. And in that peace, I've discovered something I didn't expect. I'm not waiting anymore. Not for calls, not for apologies, not for recognition. I'm living, fully, quietly, without permission. Because my worth doesn't depend on their memory. It lives here with me, in the walls I once built for others, in the garden that grows taller each week, in the softness of a quilt folded at the foot of the bed, in the name written clearly across old deeds and new pages. Ah, Lorraine Miller, not just mother, not just grandmother, woman, whole. And if you were me, what would you do in this situation?